I've done a lot of upgrades to this cheap Jobsite table saw. A better fence, lots of jigs, in-feed and out-feed support. But for some reason, I've never tackled a zero clearance insert. I kept looking at the saw and thinking, I should probably deal with that. But for me, it was easy to keep choosing things that looked like progress. A new fence feels productive, and building jigs feels clever. It's things that you can look at and say, I got something done today. A zero clearance insert doesn't really give you that feeling. It's small, it disappears once it's installed, and there's nothing really to admire afterwards. So I kept upgrading the exciting parts of the saw, while ignoring the one part I knew I should have already dealt with. So I'm finally gonna build a zero clearance insert for my Jobsite table saw. I started by attaching the existing throat plate to some 1/2-inch plywood using double-sided tape and trimming the excess at the bandsaw. Then I cut it down to final size using a flush trim bit at the router table. Because of the notches on the stock throat plate, I flipped it around and used it as a template to trim the side I couldn't get before. The biggest thing is support. Right now, there's a wide gap around the blade, which means the wood fibers don't have anything to support them as they pass through the cut. Instead of being sliced cleanly, they tear. But there's a separate issue at the end of the cut. As the blade clears the workpiece, narrow offcuts suddenly have room to drop. Sometimes they tip, sometimes they fall into the throat plate, and every once in a while, they get kicked back at the person operating the saw. And this can happen on cuts that you otherwise wouldn't think twice about. A zero clearance insert supports the work right at the blade, which immediately improves cut quality and prevents small offcuts from dropping into the throat plate. I used the router to cut out a recess for a protrusion inside the body of the saw. There's a few things about this particular Jobsite saw, the DeWalt DWE 7485, that make it a little bit tricky to make a zero clearance insert. Come here. The first issue is this metal ridge right here. If you try to make a flat zero clearance insert, it's just going to tilt around on that. And so that's why I've added this space on the bottom of mine. The second issue is a little harder to spot until you've tried making a few, like I have. And it's the riving knife. Now, you'll always have to cut a slot for the riving knife, and that's totally fine. But the riving knife has this hunk of metal right here that sits alongside it that actually pushes up into the big gap on the stock throat plate. We're gonna have to account for that. I used the stock throat plate to mark the placement of the leveling screws. Then I headed over to the drill press to drill some through holes and blind holes to accommodate the screws in my new zero clearance insert. I removed the riving knife and the saw blade and adjusted the screws to make sure the plate sat flush. Once everything looked good, I reinstalled the blade, clamped down the zero clearance insert, and raised the blade until the base of the riving knife contacted the underside of the insert. I measured and marked the location of the riving knife, then cut it out using a handsaw. Then I went back to the router to cut a recess for that hunk of metal at the base of the riving knife. Then I removed the riving knife and raised the saw blade until it was at its full height. I reinstalled everything and gave it a quick test. After a coat of Glide Coat, it was time for the first cut. So our new zero clearance insert is looking pretty good. I could have done a bit of a better job cutting out the slot for the riving knife, but overall, I'm happy. That second test cut really showed the difference. There was very little tear out, and that small thin offcut had no way to fall into the throat plate. It's the exact same setup, same blade, same fence, same everything. The only difference is it's a little bit easier and safer to use. This one small fix points to a pattern that a lot of us fall into, myself included. Flashy upgrades, they can help solve a particular problem, but foundational fixes show up everywhere, on every cut, every operation that you do. Adding a zero clearance insert is one of those fixes that I knew I should have done a long time ago, and it was something that annoyed me every single time I used my saw. Now that I've finally done it, I've improved safety and cut quality. Now that you've seen how one small overlooked fix completely changes how this saw feels to use, it's worthwhile to zoom out and take a look at job site table saws and woodworking as a whole. Because most of the frustration that people blame on these cheap saws can actually be fixed with some careful tuning and a handful of small upgrades. Click on this video here and I'll walk you through the exact adjustments and upgrades that can turn your job site table saw into a very capable woodworking machine.